Why prestigious people are often generous. When asked by ABC's Christian Amanpour about how he got involved in the Giving Pledge, billionaire Tom Steyer replied, "The invitation to me was a phone call from Warren Buffett. If he thinks it's a good idea, I start with the assumption it is a good idea." Warren Buffett, known as the Oracle of Omaha, was ranked among the most admired and respected people in the world. His Giving Pledge asked billionaires to promise to give half of their wealth away, an amount totaling $600 billion. At the time of this 2010 interview, Buffett, working with Bill and Melinda Gates, had already signed up 40 other billionaires. The trio began by first taking the pledge themselves and giving away quite a bit of money. As of January 28, 2015, 128 billionaires had also pledged to give away half of their wealth. Buffett and the Gateses have actually taken a page from an old playbook. During the early centuries of Christianity, an explicit campaign by people such as St. Ambrose, the Archbishop of Milan, made giving to the poor admirable. Rich Christians began to compete to see who could give the most to the poor, often through the church, inspired by paragons like Ambrose, who gave all their wealth away. Prior to this, giving to the poor was puzzling, at best, since the poor had little or nothing to give back. This move may have been crucial to the long-run success of the church as an organization, and, no doubt, the poor appreciated it too. For the same reason, charitable organizations open their efforts to raise money by featuring donations from highly prestigious individuals, whose generosity is subsequently made known to all other potential donors. When Brooke Astor, the esteemed grande dame of New York philanthropy and a Medal of Freedom winner, gave generously to the New York Public Library, 3 donations immediately followed, from Bill Blass, Dorothy and Louis Coleman, and Sandra and Fred Rose. Each mentioned the inspiration provided by Brooke's substantial donation. This copycat philanthropy is a well-established tool of charitable organizations. The psychology described helps us understand why people might copy the generosity of particularly prestigious individuals. But why might highly prestigious individuals willingly take the lead and go first? We've seen this emerge everywhere, from Everest Base Camp to the Andaman Islands. Whereas dominants seek to manipulate others for their own ends, prestigious individuals tend to be generous and cooperative. Prestigious individuals can clearly benefit by not being aggressive, to avoid scaring away those who might pay deference. However, why would they be particularly generous or cooperative? It's not obvious from the evolutionary ideas presented so far. The reason lies in our cultural nature. When a highly successful hunter achieves local recognition for his abilities, prestige, it means that when he actively cooperates, by pitching in during a turtle hunt or supplying a community feast, others will copy his actions, inclinations, and motivations. Thus, by behaving altruistically, and because they are role models for others, prestigious individuals can increase the overall pro-sociality of their local groups or their sections of the social network. This, of course, means that any altruism is only altruism in the short-term sense. In the longer run, prestigious individuals who behave generously get to live in a social network that, by virtue of their own actions, becomes more generous and cooperative. For example, by causing others to donate, Brooke Astor gets to live in a better city with, at least, an excellent public library. By contrast, if low-status individuals behave altruistically, no one is likely to copy them or their motivations, so the social worlds they live in won't improve with their generosity. For this reason, I suspect that natural selection has psychologically linked the achievement of prestige with pro-social inclinations, especially generosity. The psychological link is so tight that in many places, where not everyone will know who is prestigious, generosity actually turns into a cue of prestige. That is, cultural evolution has sharpened up this link so that attending to who is the most magnanimous is sometimes the best way to figure out who, locally at least, is the most prestigious. Anthropologists call some of these traditional communities big man societies, because men can increase their prestige with vast generosity. We don't live in such a society. Well, at least I don't. However, as with the giving pledge, this strand of human nature does emerge in some important contexts. In controlled laboratory settings, behavioral experiments confirm the link between prestige and generosity. In one experiment, researchers paired individuals who had just participated in a trivia contest. The trivia contest aimed to create a minor status distinction between the players, since one player had received a gold star for his or her performance, high prestige, while the other did not, low prestige. The actual assignment of the gold star was arbitrary, though players no doubt assumed that the stars marked outstanding performance in the trivia contest. Players then engaged in a series of sequential economic interactions with different players in which each had a chance to contribute money to a joint effort. If both players contributed money, both prospered and received more money. If only one contributed, the other, non-contributor, prospered, while the contributor lost money. The results reveal the power of prestige. When the gold-starred player had the opportunity to contribute money first, he or she tended to contribute to, and thus cooperate in, the joint effort, and then the following player, the low-prestige person, usually did as well. So everyone won. However, when the low-prestige player got to contribute money first, or not, he or she tended not to contribute to the joint project, not cooperate, and then neither did the high-prestige player. Even when the low-prestige player contributed first, the high-prestige player still tended not to. Thus, not only did low-prestige players tend to copy the cooperative tendencies or actions of the high-prestige player, but high-prestige players responded with cooperation only when he or she knew the low-prestige player would follow him or her. Creating cooperation here, and enhancing everyone's profits, depended crucially on the high-prestige player going first. What I find most amazing about this and related experiments is how such a relatively minor cue as one's apparent performance in a trivia contest can yield such substantial effects on cooperation. Other experimental work shows how prestige can, 1. Influence prices in markets such that higher prestige individuals reap a disproportionate share of the benefits, and 2. Help groups coordinate on mutually beneficial outcomes. All these experiments indicate that prestige can be harnessed to foster cooperation if the organization or institution is structured with an understanding of prestige. Prestige and the Wisdom of the Aged. In about 1943, a band of hunter-gatherers faced a severe and enduring drought in the western desert of Australia. With their normal water sources failing, an old man named Paralji led his band to increasingly distant waterholes, only to find them dry or insufficient. After traveling far across their vast territory and checking more than 24 waterholes, Peralji faced having to lead his band to their last tribal water refuge, a place he had only been to once in his life during his manhood initiation rite a half-century earlier. When the band finally arrived, their last refuge was jammed with people from at least 5 other tribal groups. Soon, local food supplies at the refuge began to fail. Confronting disaster, Peralji recalled the ceremonial song cycles that his people periodically performed at rituals. The songs told of the wanderings of ancestral beings and included a sequence of places and names. Relying on these ancient lyrics to direct him, Peralji headed off into territories unknown to him, followed by several young men and their families. Combining the information in the songs with trail markings, Peralji led the group along a chain of 50 to 60 small waterholes and across 350 kilometers of desert, eventually arriving at Mendora Station on Australia's west coast. The group had been saved by their ritual songs and by the distant memories of an old man. As Chapter 4 points out, older people not only have a lifetime of their own direct experience, such as Peralji's trip to the water refuge during his initiation rite, but they also have had a lifetime of cultural learning opportunities to memorize things like ritual songs. Once we became a sufficiently cultural species, capable of selectively focusing on and learning from certain models, older individuals often emerged as important information resources. By opening the informational floodgates between generations, cultural transmission changes the relationship between younger and older individuals. By contrast, in non-cultural species, not only is the information accumulated by older individuals limited to what they can acquire through their own experience, but it's also of little consequence to others, since they usually lack the psychological abilities to obtain it. Thus, in species with cultural learning, while aging individuals may be physically declining, they still possess transmittable know-how that makes them increasingly valuable to younger generations. This accumulated knowledge may explain why the elderly are prestigious in most, if not all, traditional societies. In an extensive cross-cultural survey of the role of the aged in 69 small-scale or traditional societies, 46 societies included explicit mentions of respect, deference, reverence, homage, or obeisance to the aged, while in 5 more societies this could be readily inferred. The remaining cases simply made no mention of how the elderly were treated, rather than suggesting the elderly were treated with reduced deference or respect. Across these societies, the aged receive many perks as part of this prestige deference. Elderly Tasmanians, for example, got to eat the best food, while aged Omaha were exempt from having to scarify themselves after someone died, and mature Crow got out of many unpleasant tasks. Meanwhile, leadership positions and governing councils were often restricted to people of a certain vintage. Crucially, many of these ethnographic accounts explain why the elderly were revered, because they possess an abundance of knowledge in important domains such as lore, magic, hunting, rituals, decision-making, and medicine. Consistent with this view, these accounts also make clear that the aged rapidly lose status and deference when their mental faculties begin to decline or they appear incompetent. Based on his extensive review, one researcher observed, "The most striking fact about respect for old age is its widespread occurrence, practically universal in all known societies." The evolutionary reason is that older age is often a cue that someone is likely to possess knowledge or wisdom, and for this, we humans grant prestige status. It's also why most other animals don't respect their elderly. In many small-scale societies, institutions or social norms also endow the senior members of a community with dominance by giving them control of land, resources, inheritance, or marriage decisions. So the aged may sometimes simultaneously possess both dominance and prestige, just as many supervisors do in our modern institutions. Nevertheless, as discussed in the Lost on the Moon task, it's important to keep prestige and dominance conceptually separate, since the underlying cognitive and emotional patterns are distinct, as are the implications for cooperation. If the elderly are so often prestigious across human societies, why aren't they particularly admired or respected in many Western societies? To answer this, we return to the evolutionary logic. The aged are accorded prestige and deference when more decades of experience and learning can provide a proxy measure for accumulated knowledge and wisdom. However, if a society is rapidly changing, then the knowledge accumulated by someone over decades will become outdated rather quickly. Age is only a good proxy if the world faced by the new generation is pretty similar to that faced by the oldest generation. Consider, for example, that the elderly of today grew up in a world without computers, email, Facebook, Google, smartphones, apps, or online libraries. They typed on manual typewriters, mailed handwritten letters, went to bookstores, and could only date people they met in person or through friends and family. In our rapidly changing modern societies, the accumulated knowledge of the elderly is less valuable than it might otherwise be. In fact, the faster things change, the younger and younger the best and most competent models get. Menopause, culture, and killer whales. What are the implications of the fact that once we are a cultural species, decades of accumulated individual and cultural learning make us increasingly valuable to younger generations? The longer we live, the more information we accumulate, and the potentially more valuable we are as transmitters of this wisdom, provided the world is relatively stable during one lifetime, which it probably was for most of our species' evolutionary history. Under these conditions, natural selection should favor extending our lives in order to give us time to transmit our accumulated know-how to our children and grandchildren, and to make sure they have the time and opportunity to learn what they will need. As individuals, our cultural stock is going up over the decades, while our physical skills are going down, as are our abilities to produce high-quality babies. At a certain point, those lines cross, and it's time to stop reproduction and focus all of our efforts on the current children and grandchildren. However, given our declining physical abilities, one of the major ways we can help our younger relatives, especially in traditional societies, is by dispensing our accumulated wisdom. This is why humans, but not other primates, live for decades beyond when we stop reproducing, and even live past when we stop being economically productive. Not only is this true in modern societies, but it has also now been shown to be so among hunter-gatherers and other small-scale societies, and this longevity likely dates back tens or even hundreds of thousands of years into the Paleolithic. By contrast, chimpanzees and other primates do not possess a long post-reproductive life. Death usually follows in relatively short order after reproduction ends. Direct evidence for this idea is just beginning to accumulate, though it's clear that the presence of non-reproductive grandmothers often increases the survival of their grandchildren. The debate now centers on whether non-reproductive grandparents do this via the informational and prestige status benefits related to cultural transmission, like Peralchi, or whether it's by their contributions of labor, such as digging up tubers. I suspect both labor, for example, childcare, and information are important contributions. However, the key question remains as to why such non-reproductive individuals stick around in humans while they are largely absent in most other species, especially in other primates. My answer is, in humans, older individuals can give something that older members of other primate species cannot: information. In a cultural species, older individuals can transmit valuable know-how in addition to any helping out. In the Fijian villages I work in, for example, grandmothers and grandfathers are crucial information sources. Older women advise their daughters and granddaughters, among others, on the fish taboos for pregnancy and breastfeeding that I discussed in Chapter 7, as well as helping and counseling on issues related to birthing, nursing, infant care, weaning foods, weaving, cooking, social norms, etiquette, and medicinal plants. During work parties, older men attend but don't do much actual work. Instead, they provide administration and advice on activities related to house construction, turtle butchery, feast preparation, fish netting, gardening, and ritual performance. As a result of the selection pressures created by the opportunities for cultural transmission as we age, both male and female humans tend to cease reproduction at least 2 to 3 decades prior to death, which provides enough time to ensure that the last of their children is sufficiently well equipped. This effect is particularly relevant to females, since they carry most the expensive reproductive equipment. By shutting down their reproductive systems, the lives of women can be extended in order to provide more time for transmitting cultural information and for making sure their children and grandchildren are sufficiently prepared. In males, there's less natural selection can do to extend their lives, though men's testosterone levels and virility do decline, and most men in small-scale societies do, in fact, cease reproduction when their wives do. Only our lineage crossed the barrier into a regime of cumulative cultural evolution and culture-gene co-evolution. However, this idea that the wisdom of a lifetime of experience may make the older members of a social group more valuable and, as a consequence, cause natural selection to extend their lives by halting or reducing reproduction, should still be observable in other species. To examine this, let's consider 2 of only a few species that live decades past when they stop having babies: killer whales and elephants. Killer whales have big brains, long lives, and menopause. Estimates suggest that killer whales, like a few other species of toothed whales, live another 25 years after menopause, which is long enough to see the oldest of their grand offspring reach sexual maturity. If menopause is a genetic adaptation to augment the length of females' lives in order to give them an opportunity to exploit the knowledge they've gained over a lifetime in cultural transmission, then this species ought to be both fairly cultural and possess a social structure in which this information can be put to use to help their relatives. Though more research is needed, a preliminary look suggests that they have the predicted ingredients. First, there's much variation across killer whale groups in behavioral practices, foraging tactics, and communicative calls. Some groups, but not others, have developed techniques for how to take fish from fishing trawlers, and at least one group has a team technique in which one individual uses bubbles to scare salmon or herring into a clump near the surface, where his buddies slap the clump with their tails, stunning the fish. Different groups also seem to possess different ecological information. For example, about the timing and location for catching particular salmon species. Second, experimental work suggests that killer whales are impressively good imitators, so cultural information can potentially flow through social networks and across generations, which probably explains many of the enduring behavioral differences observed among killer whale groups. Third, killer whales may engage in some of the most impressive teaching outside of our own species. In some places, young killer whales appear to learn from their mothers how to beach themselves, to capture elephant seal and sea lion pups, and some observations suggest that killer whale mothers facilitate this learning process in various ways. For example, moms push their calves up the beach to get the prey and rescue them when they get stuck on the beach. Finally, detailed demographic studies of killer whales confirm that adult males, even those over age 30, are more likely to survive if their mother is still around. This study can't tell us what mom is doing for her adult sons, but she definitely matters. The opportunity to dispense the information accumulated over decades is possible in killer whales because the females remain in stable family groups. These matrilineal groups associate with related families, who are probably sister lineages, to form pods. So, knowledgeable grandmothers often have the chance to use their knowledge to benefit most or all of their close relatives, which may be the key selection pressure giving rise to menopause. The story is similar for elephants. In 1993, a severe drought hit Tanzania, resulting in the death of 20% of the African elephant calves in a population of about 200. This population contained 21 different families, each of which was led by a single matriarch. The 21 elephant families were divided into 3 clans, and each clan shared the same territory during the wet season, so they knew each other. Researchers studying these elephants analyzed the survival of the calves and found that families led by older matriarchs suffered fewer deaths of their calves during this drought. Moreover, 2 of the 3 elephant clans unexpectedly left the park during the drought, presumably in search of water, and both had much higher survival rates than the one clan that stayed behind. It happens that these severe droughts occur only about once every 4 to 5 decades, and the last one hit about 1960. After that, sadly, elephant poaching in the 1970s killed off many of the elephants who would have been old enough in 1993 to recall the 1960 drought. However, it turns out that exactly 1 member of each of the 2 clans who left the park, and thus survived more effectively, were old enough to recall life in 1960. This suggests that, like Peralji in the Australian desert, they may have remembered what to do during a severe drought and led their groups to the last water refuges. In the clan who stayed behind, the oldest member was born in 1960, and so was too young to have recalled the last major drought. More generally, aging elephant matriarchs have a big impact on their families, because those led by older matriarchs do better at identifying and avoiding predators, lions and humans, avoiding internal conflicts, and identifying the calls of their fellow elephants. For example, in one set of field experiments, researchers played lion roars from both male and female lions, and from either a single lion or a trio of lions. For elephants, male lions are much more dangerous than females, and of course 3 lions are always worse than only 1. All the elephants generally responded with more defensive preparations when they heard 3 lions instead of 1. However, only the older matriarchs keenly recognized the increased danger of male lions over female lions and responded to the increased threat with elephant defensive maneuvers. This greater knowledge does, in fact, cash out, because older matriarchs, while not reproducing themselves, do appear to increase the reproductive success of their family group, and their knowledge is passed to their offspring and grand offspring. My point is that under the right conditions, natural selection will favor extending the lives of individuals in order to provide them with opportunities to exploit and transmit the information they've gleaned over a lifetime. Selection also favors attending to, learning from, and respecting the senior members of one's community when they are likely to possess valuable cultural information. This goes for humans as well as less cultural species like elephants and killer whales. Leadership and the evolution of human societies. Exploring how culture-gene coevolution has shaped our species' status psychology is crucial for understanding the emergence of political institutions. In egalitarian societies, which lack hierarchical institutions, prestige lays a crucial foundation for politics and economics. As we discussed, even the smallest scale foraging societies are disproportionately influenced by prestigious individuals whose status is rooted in success or skill in locally valued domains like hunting or warfare. In traditional societies living in richer environments, prestigious men use their persuasive abilities, influence, and generosity to expand their sphere of influence in competition with other prestigious big men. In some places, these competitions result in epic feasts at which these individuals seek to enhance their prestige by giving away more than their competitors, crushing them with their productivity, organizational skills, and generosity. These big men, which is often the literal local translation, can accumulate substantial influence in their lifetimes, though when they die, little of this influence passes to their descendants. Similarly, understanding dominance helps illuminate the psychological underpinnings of hierarchical institutions, such as those based on hereditary chiefs or divine kings. Many modern institutions harness both forms of status as they aspire to promote individuals based on merit, skill, success, and knowledge into positions of dominance where they control the costs and benefits to others. For example, salaries, promotions, and vacations. Effective institutions often harness or suppress aspects of our status psychology in non-intuitive ways. Take the Great Sanhedrin, the ancient Jewish court and legislature that persisted for centuries at the beginning of the Common Era. When deliberating on a capital case, its 70 judges would each share their views, beginning with the youngest and lowest-ranking member, and then proceed in turn to the wisest and most respected member. This is an interesting norm because, 1, it's nearly the opposite of how things would go if we let nature take its course, and 2, it helps guarantee that all the judges got to hear the least varnished views of the lower-ranking members, since otherwise the views of the lowest status individuals would be tainted by both the persuasive and deferential effects of prestige and dominance. Concerns with dominance may have been further mitigated by 1, a sharing of the directorship of the Sanhedrin by 2 individuals, who could be removed by a vote of the judges, 2, the similar social class and background of judges, and 3, social norms that suppressed status displays. These customs are not something that smart people often just think up, and even when they do, such practices are hard to implement. This is so because the high-status members of such deliberative bodies tend to believe their views deserve special attention and want the opportunity to speak first to increase their influence on outcomes. Converging with their colleagues, low-status members are often disinclined to speak first, out of a fear of looking ill-informed or of contradicting the high-status individuals who haven't yet spoken. Thus, neither high nor low-status individuals would necessarily be particularly supportive of a low-to-high status speaking rule, unless they understood something of status psychology and were more concerned about the institution's long-term success than their personal influence and careers. Professors in university departments, for example, regularly meet to discuss important issues and then vote. In my experience in departments of anthropology, psychology, and economics, the spontaneous speaking order is almost always from high to low prestige, except that often the youngest and most junior professors don't say anything at all. Similarly, though the Supreme Court of Canada uses the same speaking protocol as the Great Sanhedrin, the U.S. Supreme Court goes the opposite way, beginning with the Chief Justice and proceeding down from there. Across human societies, we see that seeking prestige, often more than wealth itself, drives much human behavior. However, prestige derives from success, skill, or knowledge in locally valued domains. While not infinitely malleable, what constitutes a valued domain is amazingly flexible. The differential success of societies and institutions will hinge, in part, on what domains are valued. How respectable was it to excel in reading, inventing machines, memorizing ancient texts, having children, obtaining additional wives, or growing yams? I'll close this chapter with a lesson in leadership that reflects an intuitive grasp of prestige from the English explorer James Cook. In 1768, as Lieutenant Cook was preparing to depart for the South Pacific, scurvy continued to plague the British Navy, as it had for centuries, killing many sailors. Scurvy symptoms start with spongy gums and a general malaise, which is followed by bleeding from the nose and mouth and the loss of teeth. If vitamin C is not consumed, this decline ends in death. On the suggestion of an English physician, Cook obtained a large supply of sauerkraut, which we know now will prevent scurvy. Since sauerkraut represented a rather pungent and unusual deviation from the traditional maritime fare, Cook worried that his sailors would refuse to eat it, and knew that neither force nor education were likely to succeed in creating an enduring dietary shift. Instead, he ordered that plates of sauerkraut be dressed and served at the officers' mess, but not at the sailors' mess. Within a week of setting sail, inferring that the officers had a taste for sauerkraut, the rank-and-file crew began actively requesting servings of sauerkraut. Very quickly, sauerkraut became so desired that it had to be rationed. Cook finished his expedition with not a single case of scurvy, a feat theretofore unheard of among Europeans during such long ocean voyages.